When I was growing up, I got told a lot that I was broken. I got told a lot that I was destined to be alone forever because I wasn't forming relationships that looked like my relationships were supposed to look. So I'd go on walks with people and I'd just say, look, I just want to talk about the thing our relationship is in both of our lives. And I found that those conversations really transformed how my relationships operated.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. We look at the big invisible forces that are pulling at us every day, and this episode is about loneliness. Now, I once took a long trip as a college student by myself, traveling, backpacking, thinking that I was going to sort of find myself that way. And instead, I found that I was really lonely, and that for me, loneliness can be a really debilitating thing. And the problem right now is there's an incredible amount of that going on. People are reporting all across industrialized societies record amounts of loneliness. And that has to do, it seems, with industrialization, our sort of modern lifestyle in which we're working alone, we're living apart from our families, we're under pressure to perform. Those things are leading to real dissatisfaction, real loneliness in our lives. But here's the thing. This week's guest, David J., wrote a 2024 book called Relationality. I'm not crazy about that, making up words, but it's fine. I'll let this one go. And in it, he actually has a very sophisticated recipe for basically trying to create the relationships that we need. And as a society that we're going to need if we're going to deal with all of the fallout from loneliness overall. And he says it's not so much about being alone. It is about not being able to create the relationships we want. And that recipe that he has for doing exactly that is very inspiring, very interesting. I hope you enjoy this hour-long conversation with David J. David J., thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It is really exciting to be here.
I have to fully admit to you that when I first saw the title of your book and you were first talking about it, relationality, I have to admit that as a cynical journalist, I was like, oh, we're making up words now. The words we have are not adequate and we're making up words. But the more that you have talked about it and the more you have talked about your own relationships and how you conduct your life, the more I thought, oh, this is a guy who's really thinking beyond current relationships. Maybe let's just talk about like how did you start thinking about relationships? Was it an outgrowth of the way you conduct your own, or was this more academic? How did you start thinking about it?
Yeah. And it really started with loneliness for me. Like I grappled a
Mm,
lot with loneliness when I was younger. So I identify as asexual, which meant
mm,
that when I was growing up, I got told a lot that I was broken. I got told a lot that I
mm,
was destined to be alone forever because I wasn't forming relationships that looked like my relationships were supposed to look. And what I found was that if I could think of a relationship not as just like this script of connecting with people romantically or connecting with people sexually, but think of a relationship existing anytime me and another person changed one another. Any
mm,
way that we could learn to change one another was a meaningful source of connection, a meaningful source of intimacy. And that question of, okay, how do we learn to change one another in ways that we like
mm,
really
mm,
stuck with me, really became the center of how I thought about relationships. And the more I looked into it, the more I learned that relationships, this ability to change one another in meaningful ways, is so critical to our health, our happiness. The academic research shows that it's the driving, the strongest contributor to human happiness, one of the
mm,
strongest contributors to human health. Cross class relationships, one of the strongest contributors to economic mobility. Interdisciplinary relationships, one of the strongest contributors to new scientific breakthroughs. Um,
mm,
the likelihood that a neighborhood will survive a disaster, uh, the strength of relationships in that neighborhood is more
mm,
important than the wealth that people have access to. We saw this also play out during the pandemic. So just relationships, this kind of abstract thing, but to me, I think a really, really important thing, and a thing I try to make concrete, are just so important to
mm,
so many of the things that we value
mm,
that I was really interested in trying to explore, what are these things and how can we more effectively invest in creating relationship in the world
mm.
if it
So
creates so much that we want.
just to go a little deeper into sort of where you come from about this, I know very little about asexuality, and so I'm going to
Mm,
ask you something naive here, which is that I think my naive assumption would have been that asexuality in some way would be sort of bound up in being somehow not as interested in other people, or being more a more solitary person somehow. But what's so interesting to me is that through that discovery about yourself, that sexual relationships weren't necessarily going to be a big part of your life. You were in fact learning that you had very deep feelings about relationships with other people. They just may not have been sexual in nature the way it was for may have been for other people in your peer group. But that's really interesting. I like I say, I just don't know that
Totally. And I think
world
this is a
well.
really common misconception about asexual
Right.
people. We have the
Mm.
same desire for deep connection that everyone else has. And I think when I was growing up, I had this sense that, like, look, it doesn't count unless it's a romantic and sexual relationship. It doesn't
Yeah.
count unless I'm dating people. And it was when I really began to form community with other asexual people. I started this website called asexuality.org that became the first real gathering point for asexual people. And thousands of us started coming together and saying, look, we don't think that relationship is as narrow as the world around us thinks it is. We
Mm.
think our friendships count. We think the communities that we're part of count. We think our relationships with the more than human world, like our relationships with land, our relationships with animals, like all of that counts when it comes to fulfilling our human need for intimacy. And so
Mm.
we're going to have this understanding of relationship that's just a lot broader. And we're going to say, look, whatever works for you to build relationship that matters in your life, go for it. Like
Mm.
it's
And
going to count just as much. Like we're going to have, maybe some of us are going to have traditional partnerships, but we're also going to have do all these other forms of intimacy, and we're going to celebrate all of it.
I had a fantastic boss once upon a time who described to me what it was like to be, in her case, lesbian, and the thing that she was that she was we were talking about, we were comparing our Thanksgiving experiences. I was describing going to my grandparents' house and this, that, and the other. I was pretty young at the time. I was like, "What'd you do?" And she was like, "Oh, me and my girlfriend went to the desert and did a bunch of peyote." And I was like, "Oh." And she was like, "Yeah, it's become sort of a tradition for me." And she was saying, and she said, one of the things that's nice about being off of the flywheel of
Mm.
conventional relationships is you get to make up new things, new traditions, new, customs. And I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting." And what you're saying reminds me of it, in that you're sort of, it sounds like you were sort of in the position personally where you're being kind of off the flywheel of traditional romantic and sexual instincts around relationship making, in a way kind of turned up your sensitivity around relationships because of needing to find community on your own and write your own script and follow your own path, right? You were I would imagine, as a young person, that there's not a lot of role models floating around in your life who could tell you how to conduct your customs and traditions, what Thanksgiving would even look like for somebody with your predilections.
Yeah, and I think the big one for me growing up was around how I was going to have kids, right? Like I
Hmm.
knew I wanted kids from a very, very young age. Kids just like
Hmm.
lit me up. They gave me all of this joy. And uh, I had no idea how I was going to go about forming a relationship that was stable and committed enough to be a parent in. Uh, and what I started doing was kind of adding intention to my friendships. So I'd go on walks with people and I'd just say, look, I just want to talk about the thing our relationship is in both of our lives. Like, how is it showing up in our lives in a way that we're grateful for? And I
Hmm.
found that those conversations really transformed how my relationships operated, because suddenly we had a way of talking about the relationship the relationship. We had a way of being
Hmm.
intentional around it.
And
And
how
as I
young are you when
started,
you're how young are you when you're doing that?
this is like early mid 20s, I'm figuring this
Wow.
out. Like when
Because
everyone else is
I'm
figuring out
like,
dating, right? Like I'm figuring out
yeah.
this.
And the bravery, I mean, the courage it would take to go, walk with a new platonic friend and
Hmm.
say, "I want to talk about our relationship. I want to talk about how we relate to each other and what's important to me about my relationship with you." Like, that's not a thing that everybody can handle. That's a level of intensity and commitment that not everybody would handle gracefully, I would think.
Yeah, and I had to like, I would usually know someone for a year. I would give them a heads up
Yeah,
we were going
right.
to do this. It was really scary to start doing it, but it also sort of felt like a matter of survival. I was like, okay, unless I can figure out something, I'm going to wind
Hmm.
up alone forever. So,
Hmm.
I got to risk it.
Hmm.
And what I found was some of my friends were not into that, but some of them really liked it. Some of them were like, oh, it's nice to be able to think about more than just a romantic partner as a relationship that really matters, that I approach
Mm.
with intention. And so it was, I started building relationships that did that with people, and then kind of dropping hints that co-parenting was something that I was interested in. And
Mm.
so around 2015, a couple that I had escalated in that way with asked me if they would be, if I'd be open to joining them to raise a child. They were thinking about
And
having a kid. They wanted me to play an active role in that kid's life. We spent a good 2 years figuring out how we would do that, what it would look like, how we'd split the expenses, like how we'd split childcare. We came down to we want to be as even and equal as possible.
mm.
And then in 2017, our daughter was born.
Mm.
And in the state of California, because of a bunch of advocacy by queer families, I could adopt as a third parent.
Wow.
And then we've lived together and evenly split the expenses and labor of like running a home and raising our now two kids ever since.
Wow.
And it's been honestly pretty phenomenal,
I mean,
right?
I was
Like,
going to say, and
yeah.
anybody with kids, I have kids, right? Anybody with kids would think to themselves, "Oh, a committed third member of the household
Hmm.
to make this family run even better sounds like a freaking dream." You know? Like I
Yeah. And
remember
like,
meeting I mean, I'm sure you have your challenges, but like just the waking hours available in three adults is, I mean, just from a bandwidth perspective alone, I'm like, that's incredible. That's amazing. So,
yeah.
wow. So you did it. You pulled it off. Your
Yeah.
like 19-year-old self managed to find his way through to the outcome you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. No, and like everyone, like I have a life with challenges in it, but like there's so much in my life that I'm grateful for, and so much
Sure.
relationally that I'm grateful for. And I think
Mm.
that this journey around really being able to think about relationships, think about how to build relationships outside of scripts, like it's led me to this beautiful family. It's led me
Mm.
involved in multiple social movements that have really changed the world because social movements are kind of engines that run on relationship. Um, it's given me all of this ability to really kind of look out in the world and say, like, look, whatever I want to do, there are relationships that can help me do it. And if
Mm.
I can't, make snap my fingers and make them happen, but I can know how to show up to cultivate those relationships and see where they take me. And
So,
that's been a really beautiful
yeah.
place to be in.
So you talk about in the book the difference between transactional relationships. I can't remember what the other one is. Transformational relationships.
Transformative, yeah.
Yeah, transformative relationships. So I want to sort of like, because it's the kind of thing that so as a journalist, I was literally just camping with some fairly new friends the other day, and they were asking me about what the relationship is like as a journalist, talking to as many people as I do, and what is that
Mm,
relationship. And I was sort of saying how it is a little bit transactional in that the connection between me and the people that I speak to very often is a sort of a matter of our
mm,
utility to one another in a sense. And it's only very recently in my life that I've allowed anybody who comes to me from that part of my life to migrate at all into friendship. And there's really only a handful of people for whom that's been true. And so I find myself very attuned, or just, my radar is on for what you have to say about transactional relationships, because and I think about how many people I know, very professionally successful people, who for whom a lot of their relationships are transactional, if not all of their relationships are transactional. Part of the audacity it takes to break through in the attention economy and to do this, that, and the other involves collecting as many useful
mm.
people as you can. And and you can, and you go to a party and you talk to somebody and you can sense when that's what they're looking for, right, in that kind of relationship. So I just am curious, how do you think about this distinction between what sounds to me like a true relationship, a transformative relationship, and this transactional relationship that you say is sort of taken over?
So to me, it's got a lot to do with predictability.
Hmm.
If I'm only showing up because there's a concrete thing I want out of it, I want to happen, and my investment in being here with you, being with someone, is purely about whether a predefined end state will happen, then it's transactional.
Mm.
because I'm going to sort of control everything that happens. I'm gonna try to shape it. I'm gonna try to power on it to make my predefined outcome happen. But if I show up because I have this just awareness that something unpredictable but great's gonna happen,
Mm.
and I'm here out of kind of a curiosity and a faith and a trust that that good unknown thing is possible, and I want to discover it with the people with me. That's when it's transformational.
Mm.
there's
Mm.
this there's this way of knowing that we're going to be surprised in a good way, that it's going to be worth it. Like when I think about my decision to have a kid, that knowledge that I wanted to be a parent, it's not because I knew exactly how being a parent was going to go,
Yeah. No. Right.
right?
Right. Right.
You
Right. You're
don't know that, but
signing up for the roller coaster. You have no
you're
idea
signing up
how
for the
it's
roller
going to feel.
coaster,
Yeah.
and you still deeply deeply in your bones know that it's worth doing,
Mm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
I know people who, for the exact same reason, deeply know that they don't want to be parents, right? They know that there's
Yeah. Right.
other things that draw them, that surprise them. But it's, if I'm showing up, if I fly across the country to see my old high school friends, not because I think there's a specific thing I'm going to get out of it, but because I know that being with these people from this time in my life is going to give me something I need,
Mm.
and I want to discover what that thing is, then I'm showing up in a relational way. I'm showing up in a transformational way. Um,
Mm.
and this is, to me, a really important property of real relationships, of relationships that matter, is
Mm.
that we cannot know what we can know that it's worthwhile, the outcome is worthwhile, but we can't know what it is. If I think about every really good conversation I've had, I did not know where it was going to end going into it. And
Yeah.
if I'd known where it was going to end, it wouldn't have been a good conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, that's I think the core difference between the transactional and the transformational.
Mm-hmm. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what goes wrong when too many of our relationships in this world become transactional and loneliness begins to set in. Stay with us. You describe in your book Relationality, which came out in 2024, it's worth picking up, everybody, the effects of too much transactional relationship and this sort of epidemic of loneliness that we are in. And it's interesting, right? So I remember back, right, there was in 2000, there was that book, Bowling Alone,
Yeah.
right, which was sort of a genre defining look at the beginning of loneliness. And sort of over and over and over again, the big surveys seem to say, right, we're in this, it just is alone, that the industrial condition kind of puts us into a lonelier and lonelier place. Tell me a little bit about how you think about that, because in the book you talk about it really being, I mean, it's not just an epidemic, you really think of it as like a systemic emergency, is sort of how you seem to define it. So tell me about how you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, first, just to get it out there, I'll say the loneliness crisis, we think of this as maybe a mental health issue for people. And there is abundant evidence that it is hitting all levels of society, us
Mm.
being lonely. So it's not
Mm.
just our mental health. Surgeon General, former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy was really concerned about this because it has very significant impacts on our physical health.
Mm.
It has impacts on our education. It has economic impacts. It has really significant impacts on our democracy,
Mm.
to be a society where people struggle to find relationship. Um, and there is a key uh, difference between um, social isolation and loneliness that might be helpful to name, which is um, when we are socially isolated, we just don't have friends, right? And sometimes that's fine. You could be hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and decide to not have friends for 6 months and be really happy because that's what you've chosen, right? Um, Loneliness is looking out into the world and not knowing how to create relationships.
Mm. Mm.
It's sort of looking out at the world and seeing this void and saying, I don't I don't know how to show up to build the relationships I want. Maybe I have a lot of relationships, but they sort of feel transactional. They run an obligation,
Mm.
and I don't know how to evolve new relationships. It's that feeling of powerlessness. That's the core of loneliness. That's what's so unhealthy. And I think part of the reason why so many people look out and don't see how to build new relationships or transform the relationships they have is that we're in a really ahistorical moment of over investing in the transactional and under
Mm.
investing in the relational. Like, we
Right.
have an incredibly powerful economy, right? And we use it to build strip malls. We use it to build these places that are really, really good at getting people to buy stuff and not at all designed to get people to connect. And I think I
Huh.
see that in the technology that we build. I see that in the physical infrastructure we build. Um, I see that inability to invest in the relational really permeating more and more aspects of our society. And I also argue in the book that this is ahistoric. That historically we kind of knew that the work it takes to build place where people connect is worth doing.
Hmm.
We knew that investing in the people who do that, investing in the places who do that, investing in the practices that do that, we knew that was worthwhile because that's just how we've survived as a species. And I think
Hmm.
we're in a really strange moment where I know working in the nonprofit sector, if you show up to a funder and you say, I want to invest in building community, it's like everything you say turns to vapor.
Hmm.
There's this kind of invisibility that sets in when we talk about building relationships. It feels soft, it feels abstract, it feels not
Hmm.
real. I've seen that in corporate settings, I've seen that in government settings. There's kind of lip service that says people kind of get that it's needed, but they don't know how to talk about what it takes to build a relationship in terms that feel concrete enough to
Hmm.
warrant investment.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
there's a way that the money just doesn't flow to it, even when it's a really effective way to get things done.
Do you think that it's a, I don't mean to be paranoid here, but do you think, I just can't help think about, so one of the theses of the book I wrote about AI, The Loop, was that it serves the purposes of people who are going to make money off this technology to aim it at the most vulnerable parts of your brain rather than at the parts that of you that are cautious and creative and rational. And I had not thought to add to the list social, right? And to my mind, I guess I wonder, do you think that it is an intentional, maybe not like a strategy that someone whiteboarded, but it maybe a ex post facto strategy to keep people lonely? Like, is there to what extent do you think that it's a yeah, like that this is happening in some sense on purpose because it serves the purposes of people who want political control or want to be selling you stuff or what, why do you think we've gotten here?
So there's a story that I've heard through talking to friends of mine who are employees at Facebook, now Meta. Right, this it was
Mm,
called Facebook at the time, about something called meaningful social interactions. And Facebook said, we really want to people to connect. That's our mission.
I
That's what
remember
we want to
this.
do.
Yeah, I
You
remember
walk into
this.
our
And I loved
office
and then it had an acronym, MSI, that MSI was going to be
and
like this.
MSI, right?
It's so
You
funny.
walk
Yeah,
into
right.
Facebook offices, it says, we connect people, right? They're like, that's
Mm,
what we want to do. So
yeah.
they had their social scientists go and they asked their users who felt most connected. And then they went and found the transactional actions on Facebook that were correlated with those users, things like liking and sharing. And it just so happened that out of that basket of metrics they choose, they also chose the ones that made them the most money.
Hmm.
And because they didn't really have a way to name what human connection, what real connection was, they like chose these transactional proxies for it, and then they optimized their whole system for those transactional proxies. And it
Hmm.
turns out that that just resulted in making people more lonely.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
trying to trying to get people to do exactly what you trying to optimize a whole system to get them to be really predictable and transactional squeezes the relationship out, even when on some level your goal is to put relationship in. Now, I think
Hmm.
it's debatable whether Facebook actually ever really had the goal or whether it was just to be more relational or whether it was just rhetoric. But I see plenty of examples of people trying to build connection and failing by being too transactional.
Hmm.
So I think while there are some people who cynically don't want us to connect, I think there's way more people who do and just kind of don't know how to put money towards it,
And,
which is
and
ironic
right,
because
right.
there's so many people out there who really understand how to do this work, right? Who aren't getting paid.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, so they want to, like, just the adding of money to the list of variables, to the check boxes, changes the recipe and makes a whole other loaf of bread that no one intended or wanted. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. Do you think that um, the this you say there's this long list of people that can do this work but don't get paid on it. That's the other part that I thought was so interesting about the way you talk about this stuff, that it is a, I've just always thought of it as like, oh, there are some people who are fun to hang out with and some people who are not, but yours is a much more granular analysis of the constituent parts of successful relationships and successful sort of community building. And you having built this, first of its kind community for other people with your asexual tendencies, you weren't satisfied with that. You start collecting kind of what are the common threads here? What is the recipe for this stuff? And I was surprised at how granular it gets. You talk about, creating a space that has, sub niches and, you have to, create these sort of relational containers with room for conflict. And, it's a recipe really that you're starting to put together. Can you sort of shorthand that recipe for us a little bit? Like what it is that, if somebody right now is listening to this and thinking, oh, I'd like to build better relationships, I'd like to
Yeah.
create an ecosystem of that. Is it as simple as something you can summarize?
Yeah, I'll say kind of three elements, I guess, three ingredients that go into that recipe for me, right? Uh, the first is lineage. For people have been understanding how to build connection for a long time,
Hmm.
right? My grandparents were really good at doing this. I think about, I'm Jewish. I think about the lineage in synagogues about how to build relationship. I come from queer community. I think about the really rich lineages of queer people coming together to build a relationship. So the first question I ask if I want to build a relationship with people is like, what can my elders teach me that's
Right.
smarter
Who
than
does
anything
this
I've come
well
up with,
already? That's right.
right? Who does this well that I could build on? That's the first element. The second element for me is my strongest lineage personally is around movement organizing. Right?
Hmm.
Social movements are really interesting because they only succeed when they're really good at building relationship,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they regularly completely change our history. Right? If we think historically, social movements are as powerful as corporations in how they shape our world, and they are built as intentionally. Uh, but I think we learn a lot more about how to build a successful business than we do about how to build a successful movement, because successful movements are built on relationship. And so studying movement history, studying, okay, how do you invite people into a new community? What kind of stories do you tell together? Do you have everyone in one big conversation, or do you break people into smaller conversations? If conflict arises, how do you manage the conflict? How do you weave together stories that keep people working around a shared sense of purpose? Like, there is so much deep wisdom in that, around that, in the community
Hmm.
organizing world, that I just don't see other places. So that's the second kind of ingredient I put in the pot. And the third, and I was really fascinated uh, to study how there were all of these parallels between relationships and evolution. Like
Hmm.
that, if you look out into the world, ecologists will find certain environments where the clock rate of evolution just goes faster. Right?
Hmm.
Coral reefs have a higher evolutionary rate than the open ocean. Um, the edge zone between the forest and the grassland has a higher evolutionary rate than either the forest or the grassland. Tidal pools, which have a bunch of tiny niches and also are the place where the land and the sea meet, like they also have a really high evolutionary rate. So there's certain environments where just new and interesting stuff is more likely to happen. And I found all of these parallels between the kinds of places in the natural world where we see a high evolutionary rate and the kinds of places in the human world where we see a lot of relationship. It's like where interesting things meet, where there's lots of tiny niches where things sort of pop out and engage with one
Huh.
another.
So yeah, what's a parallel between a tidal pool? What's a human tidal pool? Is it cities? Is it I'm trying to think, like
Yeah,
what's a parallel?
um uh imagine two rooms, right? In one room, we invite everyone in, or three rooms. One room, we invite everyone in and they just get talked at. The
Sure.
second room, we invite everyone in, zero structure, we just like let them at one another. And in the third room, we kind of listen to what matters to people. We invite them in, we put them in small tables where they talk to one another about something they care about, and then we kind of have them cross pollinate. Which of
Hmm.
those three rooms is most likely to result in people having follow up conversations afterward? Right. The third room if you do it well, is going to be a lot more likely than the first two rooms
Hmm.
because it's creating this kind of fractal structure of small conversations. And we see this happening in event design. This is pretty common in community organizing. And there's a few other places like that where there are really there's strong parallels between where we see high evolution in the natural world and we see high evolution of relationships in the human
Hmm.
world.
That's interesting. So this is that category of gathering that I feel like I've attended more and more in the last 10 years, where you show up and it's not just a cocktail hour. It is, we're getting together. Here's the agenda. We're going to break into these groups, and then we're going to come back and talk. And sometimes, as someone who likes to
Yeah,
just talk, I'm a little irritated by that. But it is. But if the outcome is, because I've also been to ones where we're going to do that, and it's in the interest of like, we're going to come up with an alternative to capitalism, or we're going to come up with whatever. Like there's
yeah.
a purpose, and that I definitely understand.
So that latter way, if it's aligned with people's sense of purpose, then I
Right.
think it can work well. There's a lot of ways to do that that don't work well. But another thing I talk about in the book is that ultimately the most powerful relational space is the after space. So no matter how you get people together, the most powerful thing you could do is have people hang out at a bar afterwards or hang out
Oh
and have
wow.
snacks. And
Huh.
it's that flexible time afterward where the people who want to leave and the people who are really engaged stay and they follow up with the people who they're most engaged with. Like that's where the real magic happens.
The
And
after
everything
party.
you do in your
Huh.
event design is to optimize the relationality of the after space.
Huh. Huh. That's really interesting. I love that. That's so interesting. So, and do you find, I mean, so you now run, this kind of thing fairly often. Are you finding that, you know, I mean, do you have to put people together in person? Is it critical that people be bowling on a team, or can you do this virtually? For you, like this new Zoom world that we're in, can that do the job, or do we need to be physically together for this to work?
So in person is almost always better and it's almost
Hmm.
always more expensive.
Well,
Like
sure.
so I
Right.
so
Right.
I can, getting people physically together, hosting a place, like you can do virtual a lot more frequently and then I do in person less frequently. I'll give you an example. You remember that movie The Social Dilemma?
Sure.
Right? So I was running the part of the impact campaign for that movie,
Hmm.
and we had hundreds of thousands of people who were activated by it. And so I created a weekly virtual space where everyone come together. We'd have some expert get up and talk for 15 minutes about like something related to how we could transform the way the technology was built to get people all
Mm-hmm.
inspired to get their ideas flowing, and then break them into these little tables where they just talk to people who shared their passions or who shared their background. And um, the event would last an hour. At the end of the hour, I would sort of get on and say, look, uh, you can leave if you need to leave. The event's technically over. You can stay if you want to stay. People would stay for 2 to 3 hours
Hmm.
every single time because they were
Hmm.
so hungry to connect around this issue. We had nonprofits that started out of those tables. We had pretty significant political campaigns that started out of those tables. We had activists who went on to pass major legislation who
Hmm.
first met at those tables. Like we had these really powerful relationships forming virtually because people were just so hungry for a place to connect around a shared purpose. And that's what I found is like if you can create the place for people to connect, and they're hungry for it. There's a part of them that feels lonely. There's a part of them that's craving relationship and doesn't know where to find it. Creating that beacon for them can be immensely powerful.
The thing that you were describing satisfies all three of these sort of conditions you were talking about. It is a place of change, like the tide pool, the rest of it. It's a social movement, and there's a long lineage of people gathering together around movies that have moved them or events that
Mm.
they're interested in. That's really interesting. You really have constructed a thing that follows the recipe. You really did. You've got this recipe, and it seems to be working for you. I think that's really really interesting. When we come back, we're going to talk about what technology, the next phase of it, is going to do to everything that David is talking about. Stay with us. So let's talk about AI.
Let's talk
You're,
about AI.
oh my God, AI. Holy jeez. So, I was thinking about you in preparing for this conversation. I was going back to an interview that I did for NBC once upon a time with a woman who was using AI, ChatGPT, like many, 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 many people are now doing, as a sort of companion kind of romantic companion, but mostly really just like a sort of a best friend you go to for emotional support. It would, she'd
Mm-hmm.
say, I have a job interview, and it would tell, say, well, good luck, and here's, what are you going to wear? And, it was all the stuff that you would sort of expect from a best friend. And, at first in talking to her, the reaction I would get from people in sort of from people watching this was to scoff at her doing this, But when you got into the specifics of her life, she was working at the airport, two different jobs.
Mm.
Girl sleeps like 5 or 6 hours a night, right? She's got no time for anybody. And she said, she was a straight woman. Men in her life had been tremendously disappointing. And she just said,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time to be dealing with that. And and into that breach steps this perfect simulator of a friend, right? AI has this ability to simulate just well enough the feelings you want to get and the feedback you want to get out of somebody. And I think it's a nightmare. I think it is. I think it is a recipe for fucking disaster. Is what I think. And I'm curious where your attitude is about this stuff. I feel like you're a more balanced thinker about this stuff, and you're more technologically. I mean, you're a very technologically savvy person. You're not a person who fights. Who believes we shouldn't use technology at all. Like I know you integrate this stuff into your life in other ways. How do you think about AI in the world that you've been thinking about?
I hang out a bunch with trust and safety workers. These are the people who like think about the very real material risks of social media systems and AI systems. So I I I think I'm closer than many to the data about where the real harm is, right?
Hmm.
And we recently did a review of research on these kinds of AI companion bots to say, look, if you're working for a company and people want to, your Claude or your ChatGPT or your who, because everyone's got an LLM now, right? And people want to start like having emotional relationships with their chatbots. Like, what are the risks you should be aware of? And we started diving into the research. There's a longitudinal study by MIT. There's a really interesting study that went through the forums for Replica AI, which is one of the earlier of these companion bots, and just pulled out every instance of someone having a mental health crisis and tried to see what predicted that. And what both of these studies, there's many other studies that agree with this, but I think these are the two most solid. What they found was, unfortunately, emotionally dependent relationships with chatbots seem to be bad news for our mental health.
Hmm.
That there when you once you start getting into long session lengths, once you started getting into deep emotional dependency, um, there was a pretty strong correlation with things like anxiety and depression. Both studies found that. And what's worse is that because these chatbots are designed to be sycophantic, they like encourage you and agree with everything you do. That
Hmm.
includes if you start engaging delusional thinking, they encourage you. If you start contemplating self harm or harming others, they encourage you.
Yeah.
And
Kashmir Hill did this
so,
great piece in the New York Times where she interviewed people having those experiences. And as soon as they like, just floated the idea that we might be living in a simulation, the chatbot says, absolutely, we're in the matrix. Don't worry about it. And people, perfectly reasonable people getting stuck in that fixation because they had it confirmed for them by this freaking simulator.
and so I think there are some real risks to these relationships, and some of those will be able to like trust and safety away. Some of those will be able to put guardrails to at least limit them, at least probably for people who speak English,
Hmm.
because that tends to be where most of the investment happens. But I think there's something deeper going on, which is when we seek a relationship with a human, we have this brain that is thinking about relationship, that is hungry for relationship in what I would argue is this very sophisticated way, and we're looking for a mirror in that. We're
Hmm.
looking for
Hmm.
another being capable of seeing the relational world in the way that we see it and seeing us in that relational world. And large language models are just not that being, right? They are
Hmm.
a large tensor that relates words and pixels. They map static relationships between concepts. They do not map dynamic relationships between people. They don't know
Hmm.
how to model relationship in anything like the way that our brains do. And so even if they get better, I think there's a really fundamental thing that they're just not going to be able to do that we're looking for from our relationship. So it's always going to feel like empty calories
Hmm.
to be have
Hmm.
relationship with a chatbot. in that, maybe you could use them for advice. Maybe you could use them in the way that you use a chocolate bar, to like have like they're a feel good treat every once in a
Right.
while, and that's
Momentary pick
probably
me up.
okay.
Sure.
But if you're trying to subsist on chocolate bars, it's not going to end well.
Hmm. Hmm. And do you think that the like, is there anything in us as humans that will naturally develop an allergy to these systems, or do you think that we can continue to smash chocolate bars all day, until it really does us harm? You know what I mean? Like, there's an allergic reaction that we like to think we're going to have to stuff that's bad for us eventually. My worry is that it's not going to be something that at the end user level is going to take care of itself. It feels like something where public health people are going to have to get involved, or like you say, trust and safety people are going to have to do a better job, or the incentive structure is going to change. How do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's in some ways like what we've seen in the addiction recovery space, right? So there's a famous study where they had a bunch of rats living like lab rats normally do, right, in
Hmm.
isolated cages, and they addicted them all to heroin, and it was really bad. And then they gave the rats a thriving community where they were having a lot of meaningful rat-like interactions with one another in the way they would in the wild, and they were much less responsive to heroin. It
Wow.
just didn't
Oh,
have the
that's
same
interesting.
hold on them
Huh. Hmm.
because there was this sort of more authentic form of relational joy that was there. And I think chatbots are going to be the same thing in that like you if you have real food available and you get to experience what real food is like, then maybe you won't want to cram chocolate bars all the time
Hmm.
because maybe some part of you will realize that that makes you feel like crap.
Yeah, you're getting
And
what you need from the
and
rest
and
of
I
your life.
Yeah, and so I think this question of, back to that loneliness as as staring into the void, if we can light up that void for people with
Hmm.
genuine sources of connection, then I don't think we're going to see the same kind of harmful dependence
Hmm.
as if we continue to create a world that's optimized for transaction, but that snuffs those lights out of the
Yeah.
places we can connect with people.
And you move in the hallways of power such that, like you say, you're in the nonprofit world and you go to speak to funders who are kind of coming up. Do you think there is a way to? I mean, you said when you say the word community, though, everything else you say becomes vapor. Have you learned? Like, are you hopeful at all that the power of community and its inoculating benefits that you were just talking about can be made clear to the kinds of folks that are funding this
I
kind of stuff?
I think there are parts of the world, parts of the funding world, parts of the high net worth individual world that are like really, really hungry for this.
Hmm.
I've been trying to track them down a little bit, um, but I think there's a really compelling case. If you look out into the world and you see a specific place where relationships are missing, and you say, what if we create spaces? What if we create containers for just these relationships to form? What could they build in the world, right? Um, I'm talking to one group that is looking at. I was talking to one person who was looking at socially isolated women who are sports fans, and it was
Hmm.
saying, what if we could just create more places for them to watch sports that felt safe? What could that do to their lives? How could that unlock them? How could that help to transform the world of sports for the better? Right? If we had those relationships. Um,
Hmm.
I was talking to someone else who was looking at men who are into gaming and saying, what if we just built more healthy spaces for men who are into gaming to connect with one another in
Hmm.
deep and meaningful
Hmm.
ways about a thing that they're passionate about?
Right.
Like
Right.
that could introduce a lot of benefit into the world. So I think there's these, you can begin to sort of see these interventions once you start asking the question, where are relationships missing but possible?
Hmm.
um, I think there's some really concrete ways to think about how we invest in them, and how we understand if they're working or not, that
Hmm.
could allow us to deploy money in new ways.
And
And yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead, please.
no, I was going to say one other thing about AI that I think I want to touch on a little bit. We talked about how the AI chatbots are not thinking fundamentally in the same way that a human is about relationships. I think that's a pretty big limit on AI systems that there's not enough clear discussion about. I build
Hmm.
on people like to Nick Gebru and Emily Bender and Kate Crawford, who really talk about how the the way we think about intelligence, the way we use the word intelligence when talking about AI is questionable and
Oh, yeah.
has a questionable clarity of definition. But I think asking the question specifically, like, is AI good at thinking about relationships, and is it feasible that we could make it good at that? Like, I think we have systems today that they can beat your kid at chess, but they can't teach your kid to love chess. They can't
Hmm. Hmm.
understand how to
Right.
build relationship in the same way. And we're to understand how to do that, they'd require fundamentally different math. They'd require a lot of training data that does not exist, that we have no idea how to create. Like, it is a fundamentally different problem to get AI to think about relationships well. And so if we assume that we're going to live in a world where AI just isn't going to get good about really at thinking about relationships anytime soon, the humans are going to keep being good at it, then I think it helps to shift some of what we believe is possible in,
Hmm.
I think, a helpful way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that the incentive structures so far around these LLMs and the rest, have just created this marketing behemoth that wants to create
Yeah,
the impression that this thing can do anything. And I think being able to much more clearly say, here's what it's good for, here's what it's not good for. It's a great answering machine, but that doesn't mean you should tell it all your secrets. That's right. There's some understanding what it is and what it isn't is not a thing we're doing yet as a society.
yeah, and I think I put out as a provocation, like, this idea that AI is just not good at thinking about relationships. That when it comes
Yeah.
to managing conflict, when it comes to generating buy-in around something, when it comes to helping someone learn how to love learning, um, all of those things, which we need to be great teachers, we need to be great healers, we need
Yeah.
to be great leaders. Like, those are things that we're going to be good at that AI is not going to be good at. And knowing how to draw that distinction
Yeah.
feels really critical, both to cut through the pipe and to understand, like, okay, what are the limited ways we can use this tool that's helpful, that still honor the thing that we need to invest in humans for.
Right. When we come back, we're going to talk about what you can personally do to enact some of what David has been describing here. Stay with us. I'm thinking of 21-year-old David J. like taking that first
Mm,
walk with a friend and trying to, define the relationship a little bit and talk about what's important. And I'm wondering what that version of you has to teach, people listening to this who are thinking to themselves, oh, maybe it's not a function of just being lonely. It's that I'm not building relationships that are really helpful for me. And, for you, you use the word audit in the book. And I
mm.
wonder how would you instruct someone who's starting today wants to try to change the way their relationships work? How do they conduct the audit you were describing? And what are the concrete steps that somebody could take starting today to get into the kind
Mm.
of things that you've learned?
I forgot that I used the word audit and I don't love it. So
I
I'm
know,
gonna
I know, I know.
I, I,
It's
I'm gonna say I think two pieces of advice. Um, maybe three. So the first is cultivate places where you can build new relationships.
hmm,
It's it's really important, I think, to feel like when you want new connection in your life, you know where to show up and build it. And
hmm,
so I tend to look for some of the things that are in that recipe. I'm like, okay, where can I show up? Ideally, that's where I'm in person with people. Where can I show up at a place where I'll be able to get in small conversations where I get to know people, small conversations about a passion that I share with people.
right.
So, like, my brother has this. He goes to game stores. You sit down, you play a board game with someone on a Thursday night, right? Like, a lot of the awkwardness is gone because you got a game to play. Um, and it forms really good. You see people week after week. You form really good relationships. Um,
Hmm.
where can I go to places that have an actual after space where if I connect with someone, we can spend 20 minutes getting to know one another a little bit better and then seeing where things go from there. That's
Hmm.
a huge factor, right? Maybe that's a conference, maybe that's like some sort of an event, but yoga classes often don't have that. But if there's
No,
some
that's
way
a
to
good.
squeeze it in,
Yeah, I was thinking
then
about.
the
I'm just starting to go to a weekly beach volleyball gathering.
yeah.
I'm trying to learn how to play beach volleyball, and at the end of the one that I just went to, I was throwing like a picnic with a couple of friends, and I'm realizing, right, I should have said to everybody there, hey, you should come be part of this picnic if you want to, or at the very least, going forward, I should be engineering, like, yeah, a hangout time. Like, I'm gonna have a bonfire over here, you guys, when we're done, if you want to come over. That's really smart. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as bringing snacks. It could be as simple as going to a bar. Not everyone has to join, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going to get a snack, but like if that becomes part of the ritual, the likelihood of relationship goes way up. So
Hmm.
cultivate just a few. Like I invite people out in my life over for a brunch, um, once a month, right? That uh, cultivate a few things like that. Even if you're just showing up to them, that can make a huge difference in just the optionality that you feel. And then the
Hmm.
second thing, and I learned this to my 21-year-old self learned this. I would look out and I would just kind of try to map who are all the people in my life. What is the unique thing that each relationship is doing that adds value to my life? Like
Hmm.
every relationship I have is an understanding of how to spend time with another person, and it's adding some unique component to the way that I spend my time overall, to the thing that my life is, right? If I include my relationship with myself, the time I spend with myself, then my relationships are the sum total of the time that I spend.
Hmm.
So, what is each relationship teaching me about how to spend time in this world that I
Can you
value?
give me an example of something that, like, don't name any names, but like,
Yeah.
what's a relationship in your life that gives you a specific thing? What is that thing? How do you define that?
Yeah. So, I met a woman who I really hit it off with. We had like great chemistry, uh, and about a year ago, and we had great chemistry. And when we talked, I quickly realized that that was intellectual chemistry. It was creative chemistry. Like
Hmm.
we wanted to be building things together. We just loved the things that one another were building. So we started intentionally saying, okay, we're going to spend time together, and we're going to think about what work we can do together. When I got called up for a big contract related to the thing we were both passionate about, she was the first person I called. And we got to start working together, making a ton of money together. When she
Hmm.
got called to put together a museum exhibit at the Exploratorium, I was the first person she called. We built this incredible experience together. So we've gotten to take this sort of sense that there was something to do together and use it to start building all of these beautiful things together.
Hmm. And do you
And that's
literally
what I found is
do you write these down? Do you keep track of it in some sort of, is there a grand David J. friendship spreadsheet that you use?
there was when I was younger. I would get a big sheet of paper and I would sort of like draw this diagram. Now I just kind of journal about it as I go
Hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
say
Mm-hmm.
I met someone, I felt a lot of energy with them. Like, what does that energy want to be? Right?
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
there's this default that if you meet someone and you feel into them, like it's got to be romantic or sexual or it's nothing. And what I found is that each relationship kind of has a different place it wants to go. And if I can listen to that, see what it wants to add to my life, and then that's what that understanding is. Then, if the relationship gets to a point where I'm going on a walk with someone and talking about a relationship in the relationship, that's the understanding I'm bringing in. I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
look, when we spend time together, it does this unique thing in my world, and I'm really grateful for it. And
God,
like,
I so want what you're describing to be like, you know, part of the 101, even preschool level training for especially boys, right? Who
mm,
can't often
yeah,
relate to women that they're not attracted to. Like, the difference between liking someone as a person and being attracted to them is lost on a lot of men that I have encountered in my life. And I think this thing of, if you could journal up, or make it a requirement that you got to write down what are the specific things that you like about this person's words and actions, I think could be a nice beginning of some sort of antidote to this incredible, uh, you know, sort of male perspective that we're stuck in right now when it comes to the relationship between straight men and women. I don't know.
yeah, I would love that. I mean, I think there's a lot of way that masculinity needs to be healed, right? There's a
Hmm.
lot of when I look at historically at what masculinity was, a lot of it was about showing up. Like it's like
Hmm.
showing up and being part of a community, showing up and being part of a community that cares for the people in that community. I think a lot
Hmm.
about communities of care. Like that is a lot of what it meant to be a man, was
Right.
that kind of showing up. And I
Hmm.
think that, and like showing up in ways that are fundamentally caring for the people around us. And I think that there are, and provides this sense of purpose. It provides this groundedness. It provides a lot of strength. It provides a lot of resilience because those communities are strong, right,
Hmm.
together, and they're joyful and they're creative and they're beautiful. And I think that there's a way that that showing up and caring sort of got supplemented. It like got replaced by this narrative of
Yeah, I'm gonna be alone in
individualism and
my truck.
dominance that like
Yeah.
just leaves people feeling lonely and broken.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
uh,
That's right.
and I think about how to reclaim that history.
Hmm. Hmm. I like that a lot. Okay, so we're keeping stock of the we're taking stock of the specific, and it's not transactional. You're saying the specific benefit of each friendship, the thing that it does, that it brings into
Yeah,
one's life.
it's it's not transactional because it wasn't what I predicted. It wasn't what I was looking for. It's what I've
Right. I
discovered
didn't go
along the
get that
way,
from that person. That's right. That's right. That's
right?
right. We
Right. It's
bumped into it
what I've
together.
discovered now, and then like I want to keep discovering. Like I'm
Hmm.
gonna know it even better. It's gonna transform to something even better. Like I'm still
Hmm.
curious,
Hmm.
but I can name what's been discovered and be appreciative of it, and that can lay a foundation for how we discover more together in the future.
And and in your experience of the friendships you conduct using the things that you have learned, do you find that you are regularly acquiring new relationships, or are you getting to a place in your life where or do you think you'll ever get to a place in your life where you are simply refining existing relationships and keeping those going? Like how many, does a person who's doing the kind of thing that you're describing wind up with tons and tons and tons of friends that you keep track of? Or is it, or do you, I mean, I'm sure it's very individualized, but like, are you constantly gathering new friends, or do you think you'll get to a point where you have a consistent group and you're good with that?
I'll say it sure helps that I have two co-parents.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right, right.
uh,
Sure.
and I think there's some foundational people who have been in my life for decades, who are going to
Hmm.
continue to be in my life for decades. Who those are the relationships that I am building everything else around. Right, my relationship with my co-parents, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with a handful of other people in my life are the one like anything new that enters is going to fit around those things and hopefully complement those things. And then around that, yeah, there's new people who are entering, there's new people who are leaving. I think it's important to be able to let relationships go, just as important to be able
Hmm.
to welcome new ones.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. Wow. Has that been a
and
thing that are you able to do that relatively smoothly? Have you been able to shake hands and part with a certain set of people?
I I think I think that there are ways that I can check in. There are ways that I check in about the expectation of availability,
Hmm.
where I'll say like I'll go through a period where I'm able to be really available to someone. I'm able to explore a lot with them. And then maybe I go through a time where they go through a time where something shifts in our lives
Hmm.
and what I'm prioritizing shifts. And it may show up as like, look, I care about you. I still want to spend time with you. This is the way that I hope to spend time with you. And I need to focus on this other thing right now. This happened a lot when I had
Yeah.
kids, right? It happened a
Right.
lot when I had my second kid,
Yeah.
where there are all these
I'm
people I was really close with, and
That's right.
I was like, if I want to, I still want to see you, but like it might involve you coming over and help me change a diaper
Yeah,
instead of what we were
totally.
doing before.
I remember saying to new neighbors that moved in, and they were very cool, and I remember wanting to be friends with them, and saying to the one of them, you know, uh, see you in a couple of years, because they had very
Yeah,
young kids. Our kids were older.
yeah.
I was like, see you in a couple of years. Like, and I remember her sort of recognizing that what I was saying was true, but was also a little, I think, put off by it, because there was something about acknowledging the reality of that was, I don't know, for her maybe a little forward, I would imagine, coming from me. But I just remember wanting to be really clear about, like, I like you. We'd love to be friends with you, but it's going to be a little while before we're on the same page, before we're
Though
in the same
I
phase.
I will say there's a flip side to that, which is I think we really need communities of care. Like
Hmm.
when my friends have kids, especially I've got a few friends who are solo moms having kids, and being able to say, let's start talking, well before the baby's born about exactly how I'm going to show up in your life.
That's
when
cool.
you don't have the capacity to like logistically arrange me showing up. But like maybe I'll just planning to show up once a week, and I'll text you the day of and see if there's a way for me to do that.
Hmm.
That the
Like
way I can
agreeing
be
on
in
a
your house that's
choreography
supportive
early.
to you, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And we're
Wow.
gonna practice that. And I've been able to maintain some really great relationships. Two friends of mine actually, I became their night nurse. So like I went over and watched their baby so they could sleep for like a night or two a week,
Oh man.
and that
Good.
allowed me to maintain a relationship with them. It allowed me to like build a relationship with their kid. Um,
Yeah.
Even just showing up and doing laundry, like that kind of uh, thinking about how we build. The one of the end games for me in like all of this intentional relationship building is that I don't just have a partner or a family. I have a community of care. Right. I
I
have a
think that's
network of people who
beautiful.
know
Right.
how to show up for one another. I think that's how we've done family. That's how we've done kids for most of human history. Even if we don't
Hmm.
have kids, that's how we've done survival for most of human history. And when I talk to young ace people, and I think increasingly to everyone, I'm like, look, building a community of care is as important for your long-term happiness and health and survival as finding a healthy partnership. Like
And
treat it with the same level of
yeah.
intention and love and like commitment, because it's really going to matter.
And it seems to me, I mean, if I take nothing else from this conversation, what I take away from it is that like no one else is going to come along and help establish that choreography for you. The institutions we're building are not going to help you with that. It really is something you have to take charge of. You have to get together. You've got to call that expectant mother friend and say, here's the choreography that I have in mind. What do you think about this? You have to do the social awkwardness of walking, as you and I did, right? We walked around the
Yeah.
lake near my house, and you know, and have the relationship, have the conversation about like, what is this going to be? What are we going to be together? I think that's a really, I don't know. I think one thing that I talk about so much these days with the people in my life is just how so much of society wants you to be passive. So much of the cultural and material forces in this life are trying to get you to just receive the passive scrolling feed, right? And there's something about punching through that and saying, no, this is what I want from relationships, from what they give me, that I don't know, it feels very rebellious in a very positive way. I like that.
It it to me it feels liberatory, and
Hmm.
and part of it is also that like all of this is multiplayer, right? I don't get to say what my relationships are going to look like, but I can envision something that's beautiful, and I can see if someone else is like, I can invite someone into it, and then I can release it if they don't want it, or embrace it if they do. And
Hmm.
get figuring out how to get to that place of like, okay, I'm experimenting enough with the awkwardness to understand what's possible, and I'm listening enough to see if what someone wants to meet me in. Like that's where it really gets fun.
There's something really nice about sort of the framework you've laid out in terms of how we can get from here to there. And what I take comfort from is that we actually know what the there looks like. People can see in historical
Yeah.
examples or a trip you take to another country or any sorts of things, you can see what it could be.
Mhm.
And we know where we're at. And I love that you have tried to set up some concrete steps we can take to get from here to there. David J., thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.